In 1650 BCE, on the cold plateaus of central Anatolia, a lone rider tore across the narrow passes near Hattusa, carrying a message that would alter the entire Bronze Age world. The tribes have united. A new kingdom is rising. At that moment, no one, not the Egyptians in Thebes, not the Mesopotamians in Babylon, not the merchant states of Syria, could have guessed that this rising force would one day challenge the greatest powers of the ancient world. Yet this force, the Hittites, would shape history for centuries and then disappear so completely that by 500 BCE even their name was forgotten. Their story does not begin with glory. It begins with survival. Before they were empire builders, the Hittites were just one of many Indo-European groups arriving in Anatolia around 2000 BCE. They entered a land divided by dozens of rival tribes. Hattians in the central highlands, Luwians in the southwest, Hurrians in the southeast, and Assyrian merchant colonies scattered across the trade routes. Every valley had its own rulers. Every city had its own ambitions. Warfare was constant, alliances were fragile, and no single power could dominate the region. Yet into this chaotic world, the early Hittite leaders made a decision that would define their destiny. They would not simply conquer Anatolia, they would absorb it. By 1700 BCE, a series of Hittite chiefs began uniting small territories through a blend of brute force, political marriages, treaties, and cultural adaptation. But the true turning point came under a king named Hattusili III, who took the throne around 1650 BCE. He recognized that the Hittites could never thrive until Anatolia itself was brought under a single disciplined authority. He chose the rocky citadel of Hattusa as his capital, a location surrounded by natural defenses, towering cliffs, narrow passes, and thick forests. From this fortress city, Hattusili launched campaigns that transformed a scattered collection of tribes into a rising kingdom. What makes Hattusili so extraordinary, even by the standards of ancient kings, is the document he left behind, known as the Testament of Hattusili, written around 1620 BCE. While Egyptian pharaohs carved their victories in stone, and Mesopotamian kings exaggerated their accomplishments on clay tablets, Hattusili wrote something different, an honest reflection meant for his grandson, a record of victories and failures, betrayals and lessons. He criticized his own mistakes. He admitted his misjudgments. It is one of the most revealing royal writings of the entire Bronze Age. This single document shows that the Hittites were more than warriors. They were thinkers, strategists, and administrators who understood that power required wisdom. Their rise was not fueled only by conquest. It was fueled by law. The Hittite law code, written around 1550 BCE, was shockingly advanced. Where other Bronze Age cultures relied heavily on execution, mutilation, or divine punishment, Hittite law preferred fines, compensation, and negotiation. Women held more rights than in many neighboring societies. Slaves could own property. Courts required evidence and testimony. In a world ruled by fear, the Hittites created stability through fairness, and this earned them something rare in ancient statecraft: loyalty. Their environment shaped them as well. Anatolia's harsh winters, rocky terrain, and sudden storms forged a culture of resilience. Their gods were deities of mountains and thunder. Their architecture blended stone fortresses with elaborate gates, carved with lions and sphinxes. Their soldiers trained on the unforgiving highlands, developing the toughness that would later make Hittite armies feared from the Aegean Sea to the Euphrates River. By 1500 BCE, the Hittites were no longer just a regional power. They transformed into a formidable kingdom, capable of challenging empires. Under the brilliant and relentless King Suppiluliuma, who ruled from approximately 1350 to 1322 BCE, the Hittites expanded deep into northern Syria, crushed the Mitanni kingdom, and confronted Egypt itself for control of the ancient world. Their diplomacy became legendary, their treaties were masterpieces of negotiation. Their military strength forced Egypt's pharaohs, including the mighty Ramses II, to recognize them as equals. The ancient Near East was no longer dominated by Egypt and Mesopotamia. A new superpower had risen, and yet, despite all their achievements, the Hittites vanished from memory after their empire collapsed around 1180 BCE. Their capital fell silent. Their archives were buried beneath centuries of soil. Their language died. For almost 3 millennia, they became ghosts, unknown, unnamed, unremembered. Until the late 1800s, when archaeologists began excavating the ruins of Hattusa in 1880. They uncovered tens of thousands of clay tablets written in a forgotten language. By 1915, scholars realized what they had found: the missing superpower of the Bronze Age. The Hittites were not myth. They were not a minor tribe. They were one of the greatest empires of their time: warriors, diplomats, engineers, lawmakers, and visionaries. Their story teaches one unforgettable truth: greatness does not require fame. It requires resilience, strategy, and the courage to rise from chaos and shape your own destiny. By 1600 BCE, the Hittites had transformed from a scattered collection of tribes into a kingdom feared across Anatolia. Their soldiers were not merely fighters, they were disciplined instruments of war, trained from childhood to endure hunger, harsh winters, and the chaos of battle. From the moment a boy was born into a Hittite family, the shadow of war shaped his life. Boys learned to ride horses almost before they could walk, to wield spears and bows with both hands, and to march in formation across rocky hills, where survival meant more than skill. It meant instinct. The Hittites understood that an army is more than numbers. It is cohesion, strategy, and innovation. By 1550 BCE, their infantry and chariot units were already among the most advanced in the ancient world. Unlike many contemporaries who relied on brute force alone, Hittite commanders combined tactical maneuvers with intelligence gathered from spies, scouts, and even defectors from enemy cities. The Hittites documented their campaigns meticulously, recording not only victories but errors, ensuring that each defeat became a lesson, not a disaster. Their chariots were revolutionary. While Egyptians and Mesopotamians used two-man chariots primarily for transport, the Hittites designed heavier, sturdier three-man chariots capable of carrying a driver, a shield-bearer, and a warrior with multiple weapons. These chariots could break enemy lines, ram fortifications, and serve as mobile platforms for archers. Around 1400 BCE, when the Hittites first clashed with the Mitanni kingdom, eyewitness accounts describe the thunder of hundreds of chariots rolling across the plains, scattering cavalry and infantry alike. Armies that had once seemed invincible crumbled at the sight of Hittite steel and speed. Hittite soldiers were also masters of siege warfare. Cities in Anatolia and northern Syria were fortified with massive stone walls, yet the Hittites adapted quickly. They used battering rams reinforced with bronze, ladders, and psychological warfare, including loud drums and horns, to terrify defenders before an assault. Suppiluliuma, who ascended the throne around 1350 BCE, perfected these techniques. In his campaigns against Aleppo and Carchemish, Hittite forces often captured heavily defended cities with minimal casualties, a feat that earned them a reputation as merciless yet calculated conquerors. Discipline was enforced with extreme measures. Soldiers who fled or disobeyed orders faced not only punishment but ritualized shame before their peers. Loyalty was absolute, yet this harshness was balanced by a sense of honor. Victorious soldiers were rewarded with land, silver, or elevated positions within the royal administration. Women and children in Hittite society also supported these armies. They supplied provisions, maintained weapons, and sometimes even participated directly in defense. This integration of society into warfare created a culture where victory was expected and defeat was a stain on both the individual and the kingdom. By 1274 BCE, the Hittite military reached its zenith at the legendary Battle of Kadesh against Pharaoh Ramses II of Egypt. Approximately 5,000 Hittite chariots thundered across the Orontes plains, engaging Egyptian forces in one of the largest chariot battles recorded in history. Though both sides claimed victory, the Hittites demonstrated their tactical genius, forcing Ramses to retreat at critical moments and showing the world that Hittite soldiers could challenge the mightiest army on earth. This battle would not only define the Hittites as warriors, but also establish them as diplomats, because shortly afterward they negotiated what would become the first recorded international peace treaty. Even the fear they inspired was part of their strategy. Hittite inscriptions describe using terror as a weapon. Cities were warned to surrender or face annihilation. The Hittites understood that psychological warfare could save lives by reducing the need for prolonged sieges. Stories of entire garrisons abandoning fortresses at the mere sight of Hittite banners spread across the region, ensuring that their reputation preceded them in every campaign. Yet, the soldiers were more than instruments of war. They were symbols of the kingdom's identity. Their loyalty to the king, their skill in the field, and their adherence to the Hittite code of conduct created a military culture unmatched in the ancient Near East. By blending innovation, discipline, and strategy, the Hittite army became a force that could dominate plains, fortresses, and even rival empires. Theirs was a kingdom where war was not only survival, it was art, science, and power intertwined. The terrifying efficiency of Hittite soldiers reshaped the political map of the Bronze Age. Kingdoms that had once assumed immunity from conquest now feared Anatolia. Tribes that had once waged endless local skirmishes were brought under a single command. By the mid-14th century BCE, any ruler seeking dominance in the Near East had to consider the Hittite army not just as an obstacle, but as a decisive factor in any campaign. In the end, the Hittite soldiers were not simply a product of strategy and technology. They were the embodiment of a culture forged in mountains and storms, molded by survival and sharpened by ambition. They were the reason the Hittites were remembered as both warriors and diplomats, feared in war yet respected in peace. Their legacy survives not only in clay tablets and ruins, but in the echoes of an empire that once commanded the ancient world. By 1500 BCE, the Hittites had already carved out a reputation as formidable warriors, but what truly set them apart from every other civilization of the Bronze Age was their mastery of iron. While the rest of the ancient world relied primarily on bronze for weapons and tools, the Hittites had discovered a way to smelt iron efficiently and at scale. This innovation would change the course of warfare and elevate the Hittite Empire to unprecedented heights of power. Archaeological evidence shows that as early as 1400 BCE, Hittite blacksmiths were producing iron tools and weapons that were stronger and more durable than their bronze counterparts. Unlike bronze, which required tin, a resource often imported and difficult to acquire, iron was abundant in Anatolia. This gave the Hittites a strategic advantage. They could arm armies without relying on distant trade networks. Entire regions of their empire were rich in iron ore, and the Hittites developed furnaces capable of reaching the high temperatures necessary to smelt it, a technical achievement that astonished neighboring civilizations. Iron weapons were not just stronger, they were transformative. Spears, swords, and arrowheads forged from iron retained sharpness longer, penetrated bronze armor more effectively, and allowed soldiers to fight with confidence against larger, better-equipped armies. The introduction of iron also affected strategy. Hittite commanders could deploy larger formations of infantry, knowing their weapons would hold in prolonged battles. Chariot-mounted warriors carried iron-tipped lances, giving them lethal reach against enemy ranks. The psychological impact was enormous. Opponents reported facing soldiers whose weapons seemed unbreakable, fueling fear before the first arrow was even loosed. The Hittite mastery of iron also reshaped industry and society. Blacksmithing became a prestigious craft, with artisans often attached directly to the royal court or army. Workshops in Hattusea and other major cities churned out weapons, armor, and tools for both military and civilian use. This technological edge allowed the Hittites to support armies larger than those of Egypt, Mitanni, or Assyria, while sustaining long-term campaigns in distant territories. Unlike other civilizations that struggled to maintain supply lines of bronze, the Hittites could exploit local resources to keep their forces fully equipped. The metallurgical revolution also influenced diplomacy. Sapalulium Avais, in his campaigns during the mid-14th century BCE, often used the threat of iron-armored troops as leverage when negotiating with neighboring kings. Entire cities would surrender upon learning that the Hittites' forces were armed with iron, understanding that resistance meant facing weapons far superior to their own. By combining technology with strategy, the Hittites effectively rewrote the rules of ancient warfare. Iron's impact extended beyond the battlefield. Farmers and builders gained access to iron tools that made land cultivation and construction more efficient. Roads could be dug, fortifications repaired, and cities expanded faster than ever before. Artisans could produce stronger agricultural implements, allowing the population to grow and support a larger army. In essence, iron became the engine that powered both the Hittite economy and military dominance. By 1274 BCE, during the Battle of Kadesh, the Hittite soldiers' iron weapons were a decisive factor. Archers with iron-tipped arrows pierced Egyptian shields with unprecedented efficiency, and infantry wielding iron swords cut through enemy ranks that had relied on bronze for centuries. Even when Ramses II attempted to counter their advances, he could not overcome the technological advantage the Hittites enjoyed. This battle marked one of the first times in history that the superiority of iron over bronze was demonstrated on such a scale, signaling the beginning of the end for the Bronze Age military monopoly. The Hittites did not hoard this technology selfishly. Evidence suggests that iron smelting techniques eventually spread to neighboring cultures, initiating the Iron Age across the Near East. However, the initial mastery and systematic use of iron by the Hittites provided them with a window of dominance that allowed them to expand their empire, secure trade routes, and enforce treaties from Syria to the Aegean. Without this metallurgical advantage, the Hittites would likely have remained a regional power rather than achieving the status of a superpower capable of challenging Egypt and Mesopotamia simultaneously. What makes the Hittite approach remarkable is not just their technological skill, but their vision. They recognized that innovation alone was insufficient. It had to be integrated into strategy, diplomacy, and statecraft. By combining superior weapons with disciplined soldiers, strategic fortifications, and a sophisticated administration, they created an empire capable of projecting power far beyond its Anatolian heartland. The Hittites' Iron Revolution set the stage for centuries of military evolution. For the first time in history, a civilization leveraged natural resources, advanced metallurgy, and organized strategy to achieve sustained dominance. Other civilizations would eventually adopt iron, but none did so as comprehensively or as early. The legacy of the Hittite blacksmiths and warriors echoes through the corridors of history, reminding us that technology, when paired with vision and discipline, can redefine the balance of power. By 1500 BCE, the Hittites had already secured their position as a rising power in Anatolia, but their military dominance was not based solely on iron weapons or disciplined soldiers. It was their revolutionary approach to chariot warfare that truly made them feared across the ancient world. The Hittite chariot was not merely a vehicle, it was a weapon of war, a mobile fortress, and a symbol of the kingdom's ingenuity. Before the Hittites, chariots were primarily light vehicles used for scouting or transporting small numbers of warriors. Around 1450 BCE, Hittite engineers transformed this concept entirely. They designed heavier, three-man chariots capable of carrying a driver, a shield-bearer, and an archer or spear-wielder. The extra crew allowed for coordinated maneuvers on the battlefield that rivaled anything seen in Egypt or Mesopotamia. The Hittite chariot could break enemy lines, carry multiple soldiers armed with iron-tipped weapons, and retreat without sacrificing effectiveness. The combination of speed, power, and versatility made these vehicles central to their military strategy. Hittite armies trained extensively with chariots. Boys as young as 12 learned to control the horses, handle the yoke, and coordinate with two other crew members under conditions designed to simulate battle stress. By the time they reached adulthood, these soldiers could maneuver their chariots across rocky terrain, through forests, and over hills with precision. During campaigns, Hittite generals deployed chariot squadrons to flank enemy forces, disrupt formations, and deliver devastating volleys of arrows and spears. The psychological impact of hundreds of iron-tipped spears raining down from moving platforms created panic among opposing troops. Chariots also played a key role in sieges. Hittite engineers designed ramps and platforms that allowed chariots to approach walls at angles impossible for foot soldiers. They could carry ladders, battering rams, or even small catapults in later campaigns, providing both mobility and firepower in one package. During Sepululium Aya's campaigns in northern Syria around 1350 BCE, the Hittite chariots were instrumental in capturing fortified cities like Aleppo, which had long resisted Mesopotamian and Egyptian forces. Reports from enemy scribes described the thunder of iron wheels and arrows like storms raining upon defenders, highlighting the almost mythical fear these machines inspired. The importance of Hittite chariots reached its peak during the Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE. Approximately 5,000 chariots clashed on the Orontes plains, marking one of the largest chariot battles in recorded history. The Hittite chariots were heavier and more maneuverable than the Egyptian two-man models. Their crew coordination allowed rapid repositioning, enabling the Hittites to surround and strike at Egyptian flanks repeatedly. Even though the battle ended inconclusively, the Hittites demonstrated that their engineering and tactical innovation could challenge one of the most powerful armies in the world. Beyond the battlefield, chariots became symbols of status and power within Hittite society. High-ranking officials and royal family members were often depicted in ceremonial chariots adorned with bronze fittings and decorated wheels. These displays reinforced the perception that the Hittites were both technologically advanced and militarily formidable. The combination of innovation, training, and strategic use ensured that Hittite chariots were not just tools of war, they were instruments of empire building. The Hittite mastery of chariot engineering also influenced neighboring civilizations. By the late 14th century BCE, Egypt and other powers began redesigning their chariots in response to Hittite innovations, illustrating the far-reaching impact of Anatolian ingenuity. The Hittites had not only created a tactical advantage, but had forced the ancient world to adapt to their technological supremacy. Hittite chariots exemplify the empire's broader approach to warfare, combining innovation with discipline, strategy with psychology. Every chariot, every iron-tipped weapon, every trained soldier reflected a culture that understood the science of battle and the art of intimidation. Their military engineering allowed the Hittites to dominate plains, valleys, and fortified cities, projecting power far beyond the borders of Anatolia and earning them a reputation as one of the most formidable civilizations of the Bronze Age. The legacy of the Hittite chariot resonates through history. It demonstrates how innovation, when coupled with strategy and training, can transform a kingdom into a superpower. The thunder of wheels, the flash of iron, and the precise coordination of Hittite soldiers set a standard for ancient warfare that would influence empires for centuries. In the annals of history, the Hittite chariot remains a testament to the ingenuity and ambition of a people who rose from obscurity to challenge the greatest civilizations of their time. By 1600 BCE, the Hittites had established themselves as a rising power in Anatolia, but their strength did not rest solely on warriors or technology. At the heart of their empire was a system of kingship that blended absolute authority with sacred legitimacy. The Hittite king was more than a ruler. He was the embodiment of the state, the mediator between gods and people, and the architect of both war and peace. Understanding how a Hittite king was made reveals how this relatively small civilization could dominate empires larger and older than themselves. The process began with birth. Royal succession in the Hittite Empire, especially from 1650 BCE onward, was a mix of heredity and divine sanction. A crown prince was groomed from childhood to understand both governance and warfare. He learned the art of diplomacy, the nuances of treaties, and the discipline required to lead armies into battle. Boys were trained in strategy, horsemanship, and literacy, often starting with the cuneiform script that allowed them to study legal codes and royal annals. By the time a prince ascended the throne, he was expected to be both scholar and soldier, capable of thinking strategically while embodying the authority of his ancestors. But royal power was not granted merely through inheritance. Hittite kings underwent elaborate rituals that linked them directly to the divine. One of the most important ceremonies involved the blessing of the storm god Teshub, the chief deity of the Hittites. Around 1500 BCE, these rituals were performed at the royal temple in Hattusa, where priests recited sacred texts, offered sacrifices, and anointed the king with oils infused with incense. By participating in these rites, the king was symbolically transformed from a mortal leader into the earthly representative of the gods. His authority was thus sanctified, making rebellion not only politically dangerous but spiritually sacrilegious. The coronation also included oaths to the kingdom and the gods. The new king swore to protect the land, uphold justice, and maintain harmony among the diverse peoples of Anatolia. The Hittite code of laws was deeply intertwined with these rituals, and the king's ability to enforce them was seen as a measure of his divine favor. A king who failed to maintain order risked more than political revolt. He risked being viewed as cursed or abandoned by the gods, a belief that could destabilize the entire empire. Military leadership was central to the king's role. Kings like Suppiluliuma I, who ruled from 1350 to 1322 BCE, personally led armies into battle, often at the head of chariot divisions. Unlike some contemporary rulers who remained in fortified cities while generals fought their wars, Hittite kings were expected to demonstrate courage and strategic acumen on the battlefield. Their presence inspired soldiers and reinforced the idea that the king's authority was absolute, both politically and militarily. Victory in battle was a sign of divine approval, while defeat could be interpreted as a message from the gods demanding change or penitence. The Hittite king also served as the chief diplomat of the empire. Treaties, marriages, and alliances were negotiated under his authority. Kings maintained extensive correspondence with neighboring states, including Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia. The use of cuneiform tablets allowed Hittite monarchs to craft detailed agreements, record promises, and enforce obligations across vast distances. A king's word was considered binding, reinforced by both legal and divine authority, making him the ultimate guarantor of peace and war alike. Royal women played a crucial role in consolidating power. Queens and princesses often served as diplomatic intermediaries, marrying into neighboring dynasties to secure alliances. They could also act as regents or advisors, particularly when a king was too young to rule or absent on campaigns. Their influence reinforced the divine and political legitimacy of the royal household, ensuring that power was concentrated yet stable. One of the most fascinating aspects of Hittite kingship was the balance between terror and benevolence. Kings were expected to punish rebels decisively, yet also administer justice fairly and protect the common people. The law code frequently emphasized restitution over execution, reflecting a belief that true authority rested on both fear and respect. A successful king inspired loyalty not through brutality alone, but through fairness, wisdom, and the demonstration of divine favor. This combination of divine authority, legal power, military skill, and diplomatic prowess allowed Hittite kings to rule a diverse and often fractious empire. From 1650 BCE to 1180 BCE, the Hittite monarchy produced leaders capable of uniting tribes, commanding armies, and negotiating with the greatest powers of the ancient world. Each king was trained, tested, and sanctified to carry the weight of the empire on his shoulders, blending religion and statecraft into a model of leadership that few civilizations could rival. The making of a Hittite king was more than ceremony, it was the deliberate forging of a ruler capable of sustaining an empire through war, politics, and the ever-present scrutiny of the gods. This sacred and strategic approach to leadership ensured that the Hittites were not only feared on the battlefield, but respected as a civilization with vision, discipline, and a capacity for governance that allowed them to endure and dominate in a turbulent ancient world. By the mid-14th century BCE, the Hittite Empire had reached a level of military power that rivaled Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia, yet their dominance was not based on force alone. The Hittites understood that wars were costly, cities difficult to conquer, and alliances fragile. To survive and expand, they mastered diplomacy in a way that was unparalleled for the Bronze Age. They cultivated spies, forged treaties, and manipulated politics, proving that brains could be as deadly as iron and chariots. As early as 1400 BCE, Hittite kings maintained extensive networks of informants throughout Anatolia and northern Syria. Merchants, travelers, and even defectors were recruited to report troop movements, political unrest, and economic activity in neighboring states. Hittite scribes meticulously recorded this intelligence on clay tablets, often accompanied by detailed maps and lists of local leaders. Suppiluliuma, one of the empire's most skilled rulers, relied heavily on these networks during his campaigns against Mitanni and Aleppo. By knowing enemy dispositions in advance, he could strike with precision, conserve resources, and maximize the psychological impact of his forces. Diplomacy extended beyond espionage. Hittite rulers were meticulous negotiators. Treaties were carefully drafted in cuneiform, often detailing the obligations of each party, the consequences of betrayal, and the gods who would witness the agreement. Around 1280 BCE, The Hittites concluded what is considered the first recorded international peace treaty with Egypt following the Battle of Kadesh. This treaty between Ramses II and Hattusili III outlined borders, guaranteed mutual defense, and even included provisions for extradition. It was a remarkable achievement, two superpowers agreeing to coexist peacefully after decades of violent rivalry. The Hittites understood that diplomacy could achieve what war sometimes could not: stability and security across a vast and volatile region. Marriage was another tool of Hittite diplomacy. Royal daughters were often sent to foreign courts to secure alliances. In 1340 BCE, Suppiluliuma arranged marriages with the Egyptian royal family to strengthen ties and legitimize claims over disputed territories in Syria. These marital alliances were far more than symbolic. They created bonds of loyalty that could prevent rebellion and discourage invasion. Queens and princesses acted as political emissaries, carrying not only the authority of their husbands, but also the influence of the Hittite court into distant lands. The Hittites were also masters of propaganda and intimidation. Messages to neighboring kings often emphasized Hittite military successes or implied divine favor. They understood that fear and perception were powerful tools in diplomacy. A letter could deter an enemy just as effectively as an army. This strategic use of communication allowed them to extend their influence far beyond the immediate reach of their chariots and soldiers. Intrigue within the empire itself was another aspect of Hittite political genius. Kings and their advisors carefully monitored provincial governors, tribal leaders, and even members of the royal family. Rebellions were often preempted through a combination of intelligence, negotiation, and targeted displays of force. Hittite law and administration supported this system. Governors were accountable to the king, and loyal officials were rewarded with land and titles, while dissenters faced exile or death. By blending diplomacy, surveillance, and justice, the Hittites maintained internal stability in a diverse and often fractious empire. The intelligence and diplomacy of the Hittites also extended to trade. They controlled critical trade routes connecting Anatolia with the Levant, Mesopotamia, and the Aegean. By negotiating trade agreements, enforcing security along roads, and occasionally applying pressure with military power, they ensured a steady flow of resources, including tin for bronze, silver, grain, and timber. Economic influence became a key component of their diplomatic strategy, allowing the Hittites to project power without direct confrontation. By the end of the 13th century BCE, the Hittites had transformed diplomacy into an art form. Their combination of espionage, negotiation, alliances, propaganda, and economic influence created an empire that could survive where others failed. They were feared by enemies, not only for their iron weapons and chariots, but also for their ability to manipulate the political landscape with precision and foresight. In a world dominated by war, the Hittites proved that intelligence, cunning, and careful strategy were as vital as the might of armies. The mastery of diplomacy allowed the Hittites to punch far above their weight. Their spies gathered information that no army could discover. Their treaties secured peace and legitimacy. Their marriages and alliances extended their influence. By combining these tools with military prowess, the Hittites became one of the most sophisticated political powers of the ancient world. Their legacy demonstrates that the art of ruling is never just about force. It is about knowledge, foresight, and the ability to turn information into power. In 1274 BCE, the plains near the Orontes River became the stage for one of the most significant battles in ancient history, the Battle of Kadesh. This was not just a clash of armies, it was a confrontation between two of the greatest powers of the Bronze Age, the Hittite Empire, led by King Muwatalli II, and the Egyptian forces under Pharaoh Ramses II. The stakes were enormous. Control of Syria, and the Levant hung in the balance, and the outcome would determine the course of politics, trade, and military strategy for decades. The Hittites had been preparing for this confrontation for years. They had consolidated power in northern Syria, extended their influence through alliances, and built a formidable army of over 5,000 chariots and tens of thousands of infantry. Their forces were disciplined, strategically placed, and equipped with iron weapons that gave them a decisive edge over traditional bronze-equipped armies. Mu'tali II understood that victory required more than numbers. It demanded precision, coordination, and deception. The battle began with a surprise attack. Ramses II, confident in his Egyptian charioteers and infantry, advanced into the Kadesh region, expecting a relatively straightforward victory. However, the Hittites had anticipated this. Using scouts and spies, they learned of the Egyptians' movements and positioned their troops along hidden routes. When the Egyptians reached the Orontes plains, the Hittite chariots thundered from the flanks, cutting off supply lines and creating chaos in the Egyptian ranks. Horses reared, arrows rained down, and spears shattered shields. Ancient Egyptian inscriptions described the scene as a storm of iron and blood, the earth shaking under the wheels of chariots. Despite the surprise, Ramses II displayed remarkable leadership. He personally led counterattacks, rallying his troops and reorganizing the scattered formations. The Egyptian infantry and charioteers fought valiantly, preventing a total collapse. Both sides suffered heavy losses, and the battle became a brutal stalemate. The Hittites demonstrated the effectiveness of coordinated chariot warfare, while the Egyptians proved that discipline and leadership could withstand even a well-planned ambush. What made Kadesh extraordinary was not merely the scale or the tactics, but the broader implications. The battle is widely considered the largest chariot engagement in recorded history, involving thousands of men and hundreds of chariots in coordinated maneuvers. It showcased the full extent of Hittite military innovation: iron weapons, three-man chariots, disciplined infantry and intelligence networks against one of the most advanced armies in the ancient world. Both sides claimed victory in their records, but in reality, the engagement demonstrated the limits of war as a tool for absolute conquest. The aftermath of Kadesh highlighted the Hittites' diplomatic genius. Within a decade, the battle's inconclusive outcome led to the first known international peace treaty in history. Around 1259 BCE, Hattusili III, successor of Mu'tali II, negotiated terms with Ramses II that ended decades of hostility. The treaty established clear borders, guaranteed mutual defense, and even included clauses for the extradition of fugitives. This agreement was unprecedented. It recognized two superpowers as equals, codified in writing and sanctified by the gods, demonstrating that diplomacy could achieve what centuries of war often could not. Kadesh also became a symbol of legacy and propaganda. Egyptian temples immortalized Ramses II as a hero who single-handedly faced overwhelming Hittite forces, while Hittite inscriptions emphasized their strategic brilliance and disciplined army. The battle was remembered not only for the fighting but for its role in shaping the political landscape of the Near East. Control of Syria shifted from uncertain frontiers to clearly negotiated territories, influencing trade, cultural exchange, and military planning for decades. The significance of Kadesh extends beyond the immediate victory or loss. It represents the culmination of Hittite military and diplomatic strategy. The combination of intelligence, engineering, disciplined soldiers, and a negotiation that allowed a civilization from Anatolia to challenge the mightiest pharaohs of Egypt. It also illustrates a timeless truth of history. Power is rarely absolute, and the greatest empires succeed not only through force, but through vision, planning, and the ability to adapt to uncertainty. The Battle of Kadesh shaped an era because it proved that the Hittites were a force to be reckoned with. Their soldiers had fought with courage and precision, their chariots had dominated the plains, and their diplomacy had set a new standard for international relations. For centuries, historians would study this battle as a turning point in the Bronze Age, a moment when two civilizations collided with devastating force, yet also learned the value of restraint and negotiation. The Hittites emerged from Kadesh not just as warriors, but as architects of an enduring legacy of strategy, power, and political intelligence. The confrontation between Ramses II of Egypt and Muwatalli II of the Hittites was more than a single battle. It was a decades-long rivalry that would reshape the political landscape of the ancient Near East. By 1274 BCE, the Hittite Empire had secured northern Syria, threatening Egyptian influence over key trade routes and vassal states. Ramses II, determined to protect Egypt's territorial claims and prestige, launched a campaign to confront the Hittites directly. What unfolded was a struggle not only for land, but for dominance, reputation, and the emerging notion of international diplomacy. Muwatalli II, king of the Hittites, from 1295 to 1272 BCE, was a skilled strategist who understood the limitations of war as a tool for permanent control. Unlike other rulers who pursued conquest indiscriminately, Muwatalli used a combination of military innovation, intelligence, and alliances to strengthen his empire. His forces included thousands of iron-armed soldiers, formidable chariot divisions, and a network of spies that monitored Egyptian movements. His command during the Battle of Kadesh exemplified the Hittite approach: disciplined aggression, careful planning, and adaptability in the heat of combat. Ramses II, often portrayed in Egyptian inscriptions as a heroic figure facing overwhelming odds, was no less formidable. Ascending to the throne in 1279 BCE, he inherited an empire at the peak of its power, but under threat from Hittite expansion. Ramses personally led Egyptian forces at Kadesh, demonstrating both courage and tactical ingenuity. While Hittite chariots initially gained the advantage, Ramses regrouped his troops, stabilizing the front and preventing a total rout. His leadership not only secured Egypt's immediate survival, but cemented his reputation as one of history's most celebrated pharaohs. The rivalry between these two leaders was not limited to the battlefield. Both kings understood the economic and strategic importance of Syria and the Levant, regions rich in resources and critical trade routes. Control over these territories meant access to valuable metals, timber, and luxury goods that fueled both empires' economies. The tension between Hittite ambition and Egyptian security created a prolonged standoff in which diplomacy became as crucial as military might. This rivalry reached its most enduring expression in the world's first recorded peace treaty. Around 1259 BCE, decades after Kadesh, Hattusili III, successor to Muwatalli II and Ramses II, negotiated an agreement that formalized boundaries, established mutual defense obligations, and outlined procedures for handling disputes. The treaty invoked multiple gods as witnesses, making it both a political and religious document. It was unprecedented in its scope and detail, ensuring that neither side could claim complete dominance, while promoting stability across the Near East. The Hittites used this treaty as both a strategic and symbolic tool. By recognizing Egyptian sovereignty in certain regions, they avoided unnecessary military conflict, while reinforcing their own legitimacy in the eyes of their allies and vassals. Ramses II, in turn, used the treaty to portray himself as a magnanimous and wise ruler, capable of negotiating peace with equals rather than mere subordinates. Both empires gained from restraint. The Hittites maintained control over northern Syria, and Egypt preserved influence over its southern territories without further costly campaigns. The rivalry between Ramses and Muwatalli also demonstrates the sophistication of Hittite statecraft. They recognized that prolonged warfare could drain resources and destabilize internal governance. By combining military innovation with diplomacy, they created an empire capable of surviving in a world dominated by powerful neighbors. Their approach was methodical: intelligence gathering, strategic deployments, psychological warfare, and ultimately negotiation when victory could not be absolute. This episode also highlights the personal dimension of ancient leadership. Both Muwatalli and Ramses understood that reputation mattered as much as territory. Their legacies were defined not only by battles fought, but by their ability to negotiate peace, secure alliances, and maintain authority over complex and diverse populations. The lessons of their rivalry echo through history. The balance of power often requires a combination of courage, strategy, and compromise. The peace treaty that emerged from this rivalry became a model for international relations. Written in cuneiform and hieroglyphs, it formalized boundaries, guaranteed mutual defense, and invoked divine witnesses to reinforce compliance. For the Hittites, it represented the triumph of strategic thinking over brute force. For Ramses, it validated his military leadership and political acumen. Together, the two empires demonstrated that even in a world of chariots, iron weapons, and bloody battles, diplomacy could achieve stability and lasting influence. The rivalry between Ramses II and Muwatalli II left a legacy that extended far beyond their lifetimes. It proved that empires could coexist through negotiation, that military might alone was insufficient for long-term survival, and that leadership required both audacity and prudence. For the Hittites, this episode cemented their reputation as masters of war and diplomacy, capable of standing toe-to-toe with one of history's most powerful civilizations and shaping the course of the ancient Near East for generations to come. By 1650 BCE, the Hittites had established Hattusa as the beating heart of their empire, perched atop rocky hills in central Anatolia. The city was more than a capital; it was a symbol of Hittite power, ingenuity, and resilience. Surrounded by massive stone walls, fortified gates, and watchtowers, Hattusa projected authority over the surrounding plains and valleys. From here, kings ruled, generals planned campaigns, and diplomats negotiated with the greatest powers of the ancient world. Yet, life inside Hattusa was not solely about politics and war. It was a bustling, vibrant society with art, religion, commerce, and daily struggles that reveal the human side of this legendary civilization. The city was organized with remarkable sophistication for its time. Streets were laid out to connect temples, palaces, administrative buildings, and residential districts. Massive gates, such as the Lion Gate and the Sphinx Gate, served both defensive and ceremonial purposes, decorated with carvings of lions, sphinxes, and storm gods. These gates announced to visitors the strength and divine favor of the Hittite rulers, sending a clear message that Hattusa was both a fortress and a seat of divine authority. Archaeological evidence shows that many homes were constructed with mud bricks, reinforced with timber, often featuring courtyards, storage rooms, and workshops. Families lived in close quarters, sharing resources and labor, while participating in the economic life of the city. Religion permeated daily life in Hattusa. Temples were dedicated to storm gods, sun deities, and local spirits, reflecting a fusion of Hittite, Hattian, and Hurrian beliefs. Priests performed rituals that ranged from sacrifices to divination, seeking guidance for everything from agriculture to military campaigns. Inscriptions and tablets indicate that citizens actively participated in these ceremonies, offering gifts or attending festivals that reinforced social cohesion and loyalty to the crown. Religion and politics were inseparable. The king himself was seen as a mediator between the gods and the people, and the city's temples served as both spiritual centers and administrative hubs. Commerce thrived within Hattusa's walls. Markets were filled with goods from Anatolia and beyond. Grain, textiles, pottery, bronze and iron tools, and precious metals. Merchants from distant lands, including Mesopotamia, Egypt, and the Levant, traveled to Hattusa to trade, bringing exotic items and intelligence about regional politics. The city's economy was supported not only by trade, but also by agriculture in the surrounding plains. Farmers supplied grain, livestock and timber to the capital, while artisans crafted weapons, jewelry and ceremonial objects for both domestic use and diplomatic gifts. This integration of agriculture, craftsmanship and trade allowed Hattusa to sustain a large population and maintain a standing army. Daily life for ordinary citizens was shaped by both opportunity and obligation. Soldiers, artisans, merchants and farmers all had roles within the Hittite system. Laws regulated property, marriage, inheritance and disputes, ensuring social order. Children were educated in family trades or administrative skills, while women managed households, contributed to religious ceremonies, and in some cases wielded significant influence in politics and diplomacy. The combination of structure and flexibility created a society capable of supporting both innovation and stability, a critical factor in the Hittites' ability to maintain an empire that stretched from the Aegean to northern Syria. Hattusa was also a center of writing and record-keeping. Clay tablets containing treaties, laws, diplomatic correspondence, and economic records were stored in archives, demonstrating the importance of literacy and bureaucracy in the Hittite state. The use of cuneiform allowed administrators to communicate with distant provinces, track resources, and enforce royal decrees. These archives reveal a society that valued organization, foresight, and transparency, illustrating that the Hittites were as much administrators and strategists as they were warriors. Despite the grandeur and order, life in Hattusa could be harsh. Winters were cold and unforgiving, and food shortages or political unrest could strain the population. Citizens were expected to contribute to the city's defenses, participate in festivals, and obey the king's decrees. Yet the rewards of living in the capital were considerable: protection from invasion, access to trade, and proximity to centers of knowledge, art, and religion. Hattusa was a city of contrasts, where power, faith, and daily survival intersected in ways that created both opportunity and obligation. By 1200 BCE, Hattusa had reached its peak as the heart of one of the Bronze Age's most sophisticated empires. The city embodied the Hittites' unique blend of military innovation, administrative skill, religious devotion, and cultural integration. Though the empire would eventually collapse and the city fall into ruin, the archaeological remains of Hattusa offer a window into the life of a civilization that managed to rise from obscurity, dominate empires, and leave a legacy that continues to fascinate historians today. In the Hittite Empire, religion was not a separate facet of life. It was the lens through which every decision, from war to governance, was interpreted. By 1600 BCE, the Hittites had absorbed a rich tapestry of beliefs from the Hattians, Hurrians, and other neighboring peoples, creating a pantheon that was both diverse and deeply influential. Their gods were more than symbols. They were active participants in daily life, guiding kings, soldiers, and commoners alike. Understanding Hittite religion provides critical insight into how this civilization maintained cohesion, justified authority, and navigated the uncertainties of the Bronze Age. The storm god Teshub was the most important deity in the Hittite pantheon, embodying both creation and destruction. Kings invoked his favor before campaigns, believing that thunder and lightning were divine omens of military success. Temples dedicated to Teshub often contained altars, sacred stelae, and elaborate ceremonial tools designed to ensure his blessing. Other prominent gods included the sun goddess of Arena, associated with justice and kingship, and the goddess Hebat, who represented fertility, motherhood, and protection. This integration of celestial and terrestrial power reinforced the connection between divine will and royal authority. Hittite mythology was a complex tapestry of stories that blended native legends with Hurrian and Mesopotamian influences. Tales of gods battling monsters, punishing human transgressions, or granting prosperity were recorded on clay tablets and recited during religious ceremonies. These myths served multiple purposes. They explained natural phenomena, provided moral guidance, and reinforced social hierarchies. A king who acted unjustly or failed to protect his people could be seen as offending the gods, just as a victorious campaign could be interpreted as divine approval. This close link between myth and politics ensured that religion was both a tool of governance and a source of cultural identity. Rituals were central to maintaining favor with the gods. Offerings of food, livestock, and valuable objects were common, and festivals were celebrated to mark seasonal changes, military victories, or royal events. Divination played a critical role in decision-making. Priests interpreted the flight of birds, the entrails of sacrificed animals, or patterns in water and fire to predict outcomes. Kings relied heavily on these predictions before campaigns or negotiations, demonstrating the integration of faith and strategy. By intertwining spiritual and temporal authority, the Hittites ensured that religion reinforced loyalty and compliance throughout the empire. The afterlife was another domain shaped by belief. Unlike some contemporary civilizations that emphasized punishment or reward in the underworld, the Hittites envisioned it as a shadowy continuation of earthly existence. Funerary rituals, tomb constructions, and grave goods were intended to protect and sustain the deceased, reflecting the importance of family lineage and ancestral honor. This focus on continuity extended to political legitimacy. Kings often referenced ancestors and divine patrons to validate their rule, blending faith, memory, and governance into a seamless ideology. Religious diplomacy was equally important. Treaties often invoked gods as witnesses, making agreements sacred and binding. In the famous treaty with Egypt around 1259 BCE, both Hittite and Egyptian deities were called upon to ensure compliance. Breaking a treaty was therefore not only a political act but a religious offense, risking divine retribution. This practice illustrates the sophistication of Hittite statecraft. Faith was a weapon of diplomacy, as powerful as chariots or iron swords. Religious festivals and ceremonies also reinforced social cohesion. Citizens of Hattusa and provincial cities participated in communal rites that emphasized loyalty to the king and the gods. Music, dance, and ritual performances were integral to these events, creating a sense of shared identity and purpose. In a society composed of diverse tribes and languages, religion became the thread that held the empire together, giving citizens a common framework for understanding the world and their place within it. By combining mythology, ritual, and governance, the Hittites created a worldview that justified authority, inspired courage, and fostered unity. The gods were not distant figures, but active agents shaping history, rewarding loyalty, punishing transgression, and guiding empires through periods of crisis. This spiritual framework allowed the Hittites to maintain cohesion across a diverse and expansive realm, ensuring that military, political, and economic power was reinforced by divine sanction. Ultimately, Hittite religion was a mirror of their civilization, complex, adaptive, and deeply intertwined with every aspect of life. It shaped kings, soldiers, and citizens, influencing decisions on battlefields, in courts, and in homes. Understanding their beliefs offers a glimpse into why the Hittites were able to rise from relative obscurity to become one of the greatest powers of the Bronze Age, leaving behind a legacy where faith, law, and strategy were inseparable. By 1650 BCE, as the Hittite Empire expanded across Anatolia and into northern Syria, maintaining order among diverse peoples became a crucial challenge. Unlike other Bronze Age civilizations that relied solely on the whim of rulers or brute force, the Hittites developed one of the most sophisticated legal systems of the ancient world. Their laws were not only a tool for justice, they were a mechanism for stability, legitimacy, and the smooth functioning of an empire that spanned mountains, plains, and river valleys. The Hittite Code, compiled under kings like Hattusili I and later refined by Suppiluliuma I, was remarkably progressive for its time. While punishment for crimes could be severe, the Hittites emphasized restitution over execution whenever possible. Theft, property damage, or disputes between neighbors were often resolved through compensation or public apology, ensuring that minor offenses did not escalate into cycles of violence. This approach not only maintained social harmony, but also reinforced the idea that the law existed to serve society, not just punish individuals. One of the most striking aspects of the Hittite legal system was its attention to context and intent. Unlike many contemporary codes that applied rigidly to all situations, Hittite law considered the circumstances of each case. For example, if a person accidentally caused damage to another's property, the compensation might differ from a deliberate act of destruction. Similarly, contracts and agreements between merchants or farmers were carefully regulated, with specific provisions for breach, default, or negligence. This flexibility created a system that was fair, adaptable, and conducive to economic and social stability. Crime and punishment extended beyond private disputes. Rebellion against the king or disobedience by officials could result in severe consequences, including exile, imprisonment, or execution. Yet even here, the law served to reinforce legitimacy rather than arbitrary cruelty. By codifying the responsibilities of governors, military leaders, and common citizens, the Hittite legal system ensured that authority was predictable and enforceable. The king's role was central. As both the highest judge and the divine mediator, he had the power to interpret and apply the law, giving rulings that were seen as sanctioned by the gods. Family law was another area where the Hittites demonstrated advanced thinking. Marriage, inheritance, and property rights were clearly outlined, protecting women and children while maintaining social order. In some cases, women could own property, engage in business, and act as legal witnesses, reflecting a nuanced understanding of gender roles and the importance of stability within households. Disputes over inheritance or dowry were resolved through formal procedures, ensuring that conflicts did not destabilize larger communities. The Hittite legal system also extended to international affairs. Treaties, trade agreements, and diplomatic negotiations were governed by strict rules that mirrored domestic law. Violating a treaty could be considered both a political and religious offense, subject to penalties that included economic sanctions, territorial adjustments, or divine curses. This integration of law, diplomacy, and religion illustrates the sophistication of Hittite governance. Rules were not arbitrary, but reflected a worldview where justice, order, and divine will were intertwined. Legal documentation played a crucial role in enforcement. Clay tablets recorded contracts, court rulings, and royal decrees, providing a permanent record that could be referenced across the empire. These records allowed governors, judges, and officials to administer justice consistently, even in distant provinces. Literacy and record-keeping thus became a cornerstone of effective governance, ensuring that the rule of law extended far beyond the capital of Hattusa. By emphasizing fairness, restitution, and the integration of divine authority, the Hittites created a legal system that was both practical and ideological. It allowed the empire to function efficiently, maintained loyalty among diverse populations, and reinforced the king's legitimacy. While other civilizations relied primarily on fear or brute force, the Hittites understood that lasting power depended on order, trust, and a sense of justice. The Hittite legal code left a lasting legacy. It demonstrates that even in a world dominated by warfare and conquest, law could serve as a tool of governance, diplomacy, and social cohesion. By combining pragmatism with divine sanction, the Hittites ensured that their empire was not only feared on the battlefield, but respected in its courts. Their approach to justice reflects a civilization that valued stability, fairness, and the careful balance between authority and community, a lesson that resonates through history even today. By the 15th century BCE, the Hittite Empire had transformed from a regional power into one of the most influential civilizations of the ancient Near East, not solely through military might or diplomacy, but through a robust and well-organized economy. The wealth of the Hittites was rooted in a combination of natural resources, strategic trade networks, and meticulous administrative systems that allowed them to sustain armies, fortify cities, and project power across vast territories. Understanding their economy reveals how a relatively small Anatolian kingdom could rival Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia simultaneously. Central to Hittite wealth was their control over metal resources. Anatolia was rich in copper, tin, and iron, the essential elements for producing weapons, tools, and luxury goods. By the mid-14th century BCE, Hittite blacksmiths were supplying iron-tipped weapons to armies not only within the empire, but also to allied states. This production capability gave the Hittites a strategic advantage. They could maintain well-equipped armies while simultaneously trading surplus metal for goods that were scarce in Anatolia, such as timber, silver, and exotic products from the Levant and Mesopotamia. Trade was both regional and international. Hattusa, the capital, acted as a hub, connecting Anatolia with the Levant, Syria, and even Egypt. Merchants carried grain, textiles, ceramics, and crafted items to markets across these regions, facilitating the exchange of wealth, ideas, and culture. By 1350 BCE, correspondence between Hittite rulers and foreign merchants highlights the importance of regulating trade routes, ensuring the safety of caravans, and monitoring taxes and tariffs. These economic activities were essential to funding military campaigns, paying officials, and maintaining infrastructure like roads and fortified cities. Agriculture was the backbone of the Hittite economy. Fertile plains around Hattusa and other Anatolian settlements provided wheat, barley, and legumes. Livestock, sheep, goats, and cattle supplemented the diet and provided wool, leather, and draft power. Agricultural production was carefully organized, often under the supervision of local administrators or the king's officials, ensuring that the population could be fed even during times of war. Surpluses were stored in granaries, which served as both food reserves and instruments of political control, allowing kings to reward loyalty or secure strategic alliances. Artisans and craftsmen played a pivotal role in economic stability. Potters, weavers, and metalworkers produced goods for domestic use, trade, and ceremonial purposes. Luxury items such as gold jewelry, intricately carved seals, and ceremonial vessels were highly prized and often sent as diplomatic gifts to neighboring kingdoms. This system reinforced both wealth and influence. Economic prosperity allowed the Hittites to support their political and military ambitions, while crafted goods became tools of diplomacy, cementing alliances and demonstrating the sophistication of Hittite society. The administrative apparatus of the Hittite Empire ensured that economic activity was efficient and sustainable. Provincial governors monitored resource production, collected taxes, and reported to the central government. Clay tablets reveal meticulous record-keeping. Quantities of grain, shipments of metal, and inventories of livestock were documented with precision. This bureaucracy allowed the empire to mobilize resources quickly, whether for building projects, military campaigns, or famine relief. It also ensured accountability, minimizing corruption, and maintaining the trust of both elites and commoners. By the 13th century BCE, Hittite economic power had reached its zenith. The empire's wealth funded vast armies, impressive urban construction projects, and extensive fortifications. Roads and caravan routes linked distant provinces, facilitating the movement of goods, soldiers, and information. Trade agreements with Egypt, Assyria, and other neighboring states not only enriched the Hittites materially, but also politically, reinforcing their status as equals among the great powers of the ancient world. The prosperity of the Hittite economy was not merely about wealth, it was about stability and influence. It enabled the empire to survive wars, sustain large populations, and maintain cultural and administrative sophistication. By controlling key resources, fostering trade, and organizing agriculture and industry, the Hittites ensured that their empire was resilient in the face of both internal and external challenges. Their economic model demonstrates how strategy, planning, and resource management are as critical to power as military strength or diplomatic skill. Ultimately, the Hittite economy was the engine that fueled their empire. It created the means for war, diplomacy, and cultural achievement, allowing a civilization from the Anatolian highlands to shape the destiny of the ancient Near East. Their ability to harness wealth, resources, and trade was a defining factor in their enduring influence and a key reason why their legacy continues to fascinate historians and archaeologists to this day. By 1600 BCE, the Hittites were not only formidable warriors and skilled diplomats, they were also creators of a rich cultural legacy that has endured for millennia. Their art, writing, and architecture offer a window into a civilization that combined practicality with profound creativity. Unlike some ancient societies that left only monumental structures or royal inscriptions, the Hittites expressed their identity through multiple mediums, elaborate reliefs, finely crafted objects, and a sophisticated written tradition that preserved history, law, and myth. Hittite art was both functional and symbolic. Reliefs and sculptures adorned temples, palaces, and city gates, depicting gods, kings, and mythical creatures. The Lion Gate of Hattusay, for instance, features two powerful lions flanking the entrance, symbolizing strength and divine protection. Other carvings show storm gods wielding lightning bolts, reinforcing the idea that divine power watched over the city and the king. Art was not merely decorative, it communicated political and religious messages, projecting authority and inspiring awe among citizens and visitors alike. Sculptors and craftsmen worked with stone, bronze, and clay, create both utilitarian objects and ceremonial items. Bronze weapons, ornate jewelry, and carved seals demonstrate technical mastery, while figurines and ritual vessels reveal a spiritual dimension. These objects often bore inscriptions invoking the gods or commemorating victories, blending artistry with meaning. The Hittites understood that material culture could reinforce social cohesion, celebrate achievements, and immortalize rulers' accomplishments. Writing was central to preserving Hittite civilization. The Hittites adopted cuneiform from Mesopotamia, using it to record treaties, laws, and correspondence with neighboring powers. They also developed a hieroglyphic system for monumental inscriptions, often found on gates, temples, and stelae. By combining practical administration with ceremonial record-keeping, the Hittites ensured that both governance and history were meticulously documented. Diplomatic letters, like those sent to Egypt or Babylonia, demonstrate literacy's role in international relations, while legal codes preserved social order and reflected ethical values. Mythology and literature were preserved in written form, providing insight into Hittite beliefs, ethics, and worldview. Stories of gods, heroes, and legendary kings conveyed lessons about morality, leadership, and the consequences of defiance. These texts were not only religious or ceremonial, they also served as cultural glue, creating a shared identity across the empire's diverse population. Temples often functioned as centers for reading, learning, and copying these texts, ensuring their transmission across generations. Architecture was another hallmark of Hittite cultural achievement. Palaces, temples, and fortifications were constructed using advanced engineering techniques, with massive stone walls, intricate gateways, and organized urban layouts. The Lion Gate and the Sphinx Gate of Hattusa are prime examples, combining defensive functionality with artistic expression. Residential neighborhoods, administrative buildings, and storage complexes were carefully planned, reflecting a civilization capable of both monumental and practical architecture. The Hittite legacy endured long after the empire's collapse around 1180 BCE. Many cities were abandoned or destroyed, yet their art, writing, and monumental architecture influenced neighboring civilizations. Archaeologists rediscovered Hittite inscriptions and reliefs in the 19th and 20th centuries, revealing the complexity and sophistication of a civilization once thought obscure. These discoveries transformed our understanding of Bronze Age politics, culture, and religion, proving that the Hittites were more than warriors. They were innovators, administrators, and creators of enduring culture. By preserving their history, beliefs, and artistic achievements, the Hittites ensured that their civilization would be remembered. Their art communicated power and piety. Their writing recorded law, diplomacy, and myth, and their architecture demonstrated technical ingenuity. Together, these elements created a rich tapestry that allows modern scholars to reconstruct the life, values, and achievements of a people who once dominated the ancient Near East. The Hittite legacy is a testament to the enduring power of culture. It shows that even in a world dominated by warfare and political rivalry, art, writing, and architecture could define identity, preserve knowledge, and inspire future generations. Through their creativity and meticulous record-keeping, the Hittites ensured that their story would survive long after their cities fell silent, leaving an indelible mark on human history. By the late 13th century BCE, the Hittite Empire, which had stood as a dominant power in Anatolia and northern Syria for centuries, began to show signs of strain. Internal political instability, economic pressures, and external threats combined to unravel what had once seemed unshakable. The collapse of the Hittites around 1180 BCE was not sudden, but a culmination of decades of tension and crisis, offering a stark lesson in the fragility of even the most sophisticated civilizations. One of the primary factors in the empire's decline was internal succession disputes. Hittite kingship, though sanctioned by divine authority, was often contested. Rival claimants to the throne sparked civil wars and assassinations, weakening central authority and creating factions among nobles and military leaders. By the reign of Tudhaliya the Thoth in the late 13th century BCE, the empire was grappling with recurring power struggles that diverted attention from both external defense and economic management. Stability, once guaranteed by ritual and law, began to falter under the weight of human ambition and intrigue. External pressures compounded these internal weaknesses. The rise of the Sea Peoples and other nomadic groups in the eastern Mediterranean disrupted trade routes and threatened coastal settlements. These groups were skilled warriors, often attacking lightly defended cities and towns, destabilizing regional economies. Hittite armies, stretched across vast territories, were forced to defend multiple fronts simultaneously. The empire's reliance on chariot-based warfare, while formidable in earlier battles like Kadesh, became less effective against mobile raiding parties and irregular forces, exposing vulnerabilities that adversaries quickly exploited. Economic decline also played a critical role. Prolonged warfare, crop failures, and disruptions in trade networks strained the Hittite treasury. By the late 13th century BCE, records indicate shortages of metals, grain, and other essential resources. The meticulous bureaucratic system that had once ensured efficiency could no longer compensate for the combined impact of rebellion, invasion, and environmental stress. Provinces that had once faithfully supplied the capital began to rebel or secede, further weakening the empire's cohesion. Religious and cultural factors contributed as well. The Hittite king's authority was tightly linked to their perceived favor with the gods. Military defeats, natural disasters, or failed campaigns were often interpreted as signs of divine disfavor. This perception undermined confidence in the monarchy and emboldened rival factions, eroding the legitimacy that had been a cornerstone of Hittite governance. Temples and priestly classes, previously centers of support for the crown, sometimes became arenas of political contestation, reflecting the growing instability of the empire's spiritual and administrative structures. The final decades of the Hittite Empire were marked by widespread chaos. Cities like Hattusa were attacked and eventually abandoned. Archaeological evidence shows burning, destruction of palaces, and mass departures, indicating a collapse that was both violent and systemic. By around 1180 BCE, the once mighty Hittite state had fragmented into smaller Neo-Hittite kingdoms in southern Anatolia and northern Syria. These successor states preserved aspects of Hittite culture, but lacked the centralized power to project influence across the Near East. The fall of the Hittites also reshaped the geopolitical map of the ancient world. The power vacuum left in Anatolia and Syria allowed neighboring civilizations, including Assyria and later the Phrygians, to expand their influence. Trade networks shifted, political alliances were renegotiated, and the balance of power in the eastern Mediterranean was fundamentally altered. The collapse illustrates a timeless truth. Empires, no matter how advanced or well-organized, remain vulnerable to internal division, economic disruption, and external pressures. Yet even in decline, the Hittites left an enduring legacy. Their art, legal codes, diplomatic achievements, and written records survived, influencing neighboring civilizations and providing future generations with insight into one of the most sophisticated Bronze Age empires. The chaos that accompanied their fall underscores the fragility of human institutions, but also highlights the resilience of culture, knowledge, and innovation that outlasted political power. The collapse of the Hittite Empire serves as both a cautionary tale and a historical lesson. It demonstrates that military strength and diplomatic skill, though critical, cannot guarantee longevity in the absence of internal cohesion, economic stability, and adaptability. Yet through their achievements, the Hittites ensured that even in defeat, their civilization would be remembered as a testament to human ingenuity, ambition, and the enduring power of culture. After the fall of the Hittite Empire around 1180 BCE, Anatolia and northern Syria did not descend into complete darkness. Instead, a series of smaller political entities, collectively known as the Neo-Hittite kingdoms, emerged from the remnants of the once mighty empire. These successor states carried forward Hittite culture, traditions, and governance practices, serving as living echoes of a civilization that had once dominated the ancient Near East. By 1100 BCE, cities such as Carchemish, Aleppo, and Melid had become centers of Neo-Hittite power. These kingdoms were often ruled by local dynasties, claiming descent from the Hittite royal family, legitimizing their authority in a world still reverent of Hittite heritage. Despite their smaller size, these states preserved administrative sophistication, maintained fortified capitals, and continued trade networks that connected Anatolia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia. In many ways, they were miniature versions of the empire, adapted to the realities of a post-collapse landscape. Art and architecture flourished in these Neo-Hittite states. Palaces and temples were constructed with the same symbolic motifs found in Hattusa. Lions, sphinxes, and storm gods adorned gates and walls, signifying continuity of belief and authority. Reliefs depicted kings, warriors, and deities, reinforcing the legitimacy of local rulers, while celebrating the shared cultural identity inherited from the Hittite Empire. Unlike the sprawling imperial projects of the past, Neo-Hittite art was often more localized, reflecting regional styles and resources, but the underlying symbolism remained distinctly Hittite. Writing and record-keeping persisted as well. Cuneiform continued to be used for administrative purposes, treaties and correspondence with neighboring powers, while hieroglyphic inscriptions adorned monumental structures. These records reveal a commitment to law, governance, and diplomacy, demonstrating that even in a diminished political context, the Neo-Hittite kingdoms valued organization and continuity. Temples and palaces served as centers for literacy and record preservation, ensuring that knowledge, ritual, and legal frameworks endured. Religion remained a core component of Neo-Hittite society. Worship of the storm god Teshub, the sun goddess of Arina, and other deities continued, with rituals and festivals reinforcing social cohesion. Divine sanction was essential to royal authority. Just as it had been in the empire, religious practices also helped legitimize territorial claims, stabilize governance, and maintain the social hierarchy, illustrating how cultural and spiritual continuity provided resilience in the face of political fragmentation. The Neo-Hittite kingdoms also played a critical role in regional geopolitics. They acted as intermediaries between emerging powers such as Assyria and Aram, maintaining trade routes and alliances while protecting local autonomy. While their military capabilities were far smaller than the imperial forces of Hattusa, these kingdoms were skilled in defense, diplomacy, and strategic marriages, demonstrating the enduring Hittite emphasis on intelligence, negotiation, and pragmatic statecraft. Economically, the Neo-Hittite states leveraged resources inherited from the empire. Agriculture, metalworking, and trade remained central, although the scale was more modest. Local rulers collected taxes, oversaw artisans, and maintained granaries to support both military and civil needs. They also participated in long-distance trade, exchanging metals, textiles, and luxury goods with Egypt, Mesopotamia, and the Levant, ensuring economic stability despite the reduced political footprint of their kingdoms. The Neo-Hittite kingdoms persisted for several centuries, with Carchemish remaining a notable power until the Assyrian expansions of the 9th and 8th centuries BCE. Even as they were eventually absorbed or conquered, They left behind an enduring cultural imprint. Inscriptions, art, and architectural motifs influenced subsequent civilizations, ensuring that the Hittite legacy survived long after the empire's political dominance ended. In many ways, the Neo-Hittite kingdoms exemplify the resilience of culture over politics. While empires rise and fall, the practices, beliefs, and innovations of a civilization can endure through local institutions, art, and scholarship. The Neo-Hittite states were living reminders of the empire's former glory, preserving traditions of law, diplomacy, religion, and artistry that continued to shape the ancient Near East for generations. The story of the Hittites is one of ambition, innovation, and resilience. From their rise in central Anatolia around 1650 BCE to the empire's collapse in 1180 BCE, they left a legacy that resonates across millennia. The Hittites were not only warriors who mastered chariot warfare, they were diplomats who pioneered international treaties, administrators who developed sophisticated legal codes, and creators who produced enduring art, architecture, and literature. Understanding their legacy offers lessons that extend far beyond the Bronze Age, revealing timeless truths about power, strategy, and human ingenuity. One of the most enduring aspects of the Hittite legacy is their combination of military skill with diplomacy. While their chariots and iron weapons secured victories on the battlefield, it was their ability to negotiate, forge alliances, and maintain intelligence networks that allowed them to survive in a competitive landscape alongside Egypt, Assyria, and Babylonia. The treaty with Ramses II around 1259 BCE illustrates this perfectly. It was not merely a document, it was a paradigm shift in international relations, showing that diplomacy could achieve lasting outcomes that brute force alone could not. In doing so, the Hittites became architects of a new kind of power, one based on strategy, foresight, and adaptability. Their administrative and legal innovations were equally significant. The Hittite legal code, emphasizing restitution and fairness, ensured social cohesion across a diverse empire by codifying laws for property, inheritance, trade, and crime. The Hittites demonstrated an understanding of governance that balanced authority with justice. Their meticulous record-keeping, cuneiform archives, and bureaucratic efficiency allowed them to mobilize resources, enforce laws, and maintain communication across vast territories. These innovations laid the foundation for modern concepts of law, administration, and organized governance. Cultural achievements form another pillar of the Hittite legacy. From monumental gates and temples to reliefs, seals, and inscriptions, their art communicated power, faith, and identity. Religious beliefs and rituals reinforced the authority of the king, while providing a framework for morality and social order. The Neo-Hittite kingdoms, which emerged after the empire's collapse, preserved and adapted these cultural practices, demonstrating the resilience of Hittite civilization even in the face of political fragmentation. Through art, writing, and religious practice, the Hittites ensured that their worldview, values, and knowledge would endure far beyond their political dominance. Trade and economic organization were also central to their enduring influence. By controlling key resources such as metals and by maintaining trade routes connecting Anatolia, the Levant, and Mesopotamia, the Hittites built a resilient economy that funded military campaigns, infrastructure, and diplomacy. Their ability to harness wealth strategically allowed them to exert influence disproportionate to the size of their population, demonstrating that economic intelligence is as critical to statecraft as military strength. The lessons of the Hittite rise and fall are striking. They show the importance of adaptability, how a civilization can balance war, diplomacy, law, and culture to thrive in a complex world. They illustrate that power is not just the ability to conquer, but the capacity to govern, negotiate, and preserve knowledge. And they remind us that even in collapse, a civilization's ideas, art, and innovations can echo through history, influencing successors and shaping the world long after its armies have vanished. Ultimately, the Hittites exemplify the duality of human ambition, the pursuit of dominance paired with the need for intelligence, strategy, and cultural expression. Their chariots thundered across battlefields, their envoys negotiated peace among superpowers, and their scribes recorded laws, treaties, and myths that continue to inform our understanding of the ancient world. From Hattusa to Carchemish, from the battlefield of Kadesh to the halls of diplomacy, the Hittites built an empire that, though ultimately fallen, left an indelible mark on human history. The Hittite story teaches that legacy is built not just through conquest, but through the combination of wisdom, creativity, and the courage to innovate. They remind us that even in a world shaped by war, civilization thrives through law, diplomacy, culture, and knowledge. Their empire may have vanished, but the lessons they left behind, the mastery of strategy, the balance of force and negotiation, the integration of faith, art, and governance, continue to resonate. The Hittites were, in every sense, architects of an ancient world, and their legacy remains a beacon for those who seek to understand the enduring power of human ingenuity.